My name is Sean, and I've been a photojournalist for more than 25 years. For the last decade, I've regularly worked with Getty Images, New York Times, the Associated Press, and other international media organizations. In this video, you'll get 20 tips and 4 quick wins to help you dramatically improve your photography using composition. The last 4 are the easiest to implement. Contrast is what makes things pop in a photo. Contrast is about difference. The 2 best examples of this are contrast between bright and dark, and contrast between colors. For example, black and white represent high contrast, along with green and red. High contrast attracts our attention and allows us to separate layers and define objects. It may be one of the most fundamental building blocks of composition. Contrast is often dependent upon timing and where a subject is positioned against the background. When photographing multiple people, how much and where they overlap is very important. If you're a beginner, practice composition with stationary subjects. The more variables we tackle, the more difficult photography becomes. Photography is mostly about what we choose to exclude from our frame. We're surrounded in every direction by things we can photograph. But the process of photography itself, we're picking out little sections instead. Why did you choose that framing? Framing is the act of composing in camera, and cropping is how we tweak our compositions in post-production. Framing and cropping are 2 primary ways that we control composition. Be more attentive. Small crops in post-production will teach you to make better compositions in camera. Be intentional with your compositions. The rule of thirds places subjects off-center in our composition. Split the frame into thirds, horizontally and vertically. Placing subjects near or on these intersections demonstrates the rule of thirds. This is probably the first composition technique that photographers learn. I find it most useful when a subject is moving and needs a space to move into. Instead of implementing the rule of thirds, we can place subjects on the edges or in the corners of our frame. You can't follow the rule of thirds and the rule of edges at the same time. Anytime you hear about rules in composition, just think about them as suggestions. When I'm composing a photo, I'm trying to make it into a journey. Lines give us paths to travel, and leading lines help us direct a viewer's attention. When we make a photograph, we're transforming a 3D world onto a 2D surface. We can challenge the limitations of this 2-dimensional world by using layers. The 3rd dimension in a photograph can be communicated where objects overlap with their relative size and where they fall in and out of focus. Using depth of field, as controlled with aperture, we can distinguish our layers. When we place objects between the camera and our subject, and in the background, we can add depth. And we can use visual cues in a background or a foreground to direct attention or communicate other things. I like to put words in the background, slightly out of focus, but still readable. Combine foregrounds and backgrounds that work to tell a subject's story. For example, I used this car dealership sign in Fair Bluff, North Carolina to communicate the location. Photographers control depth of field with aperture and the distance between camera, subject, and background. If you stand close to someone and put the background far away, you'll notice a more shallow depth of field. And we can use depth of field for visual hierarchy. Like I mentioned before, I want to give the viewer a journey to go on with my photography. And one way I do this is with visual hierarchy. This gives people cues as to where their attention should go as they look at a photograph. I like to bring attention to a main subject first, and then direct it to a supporting cast for context. Negative space in a composition is a large area that appears empty. The negative space can be any color or pattern, but it needs to be in contrast with your subject. Negative space isolates a subject and has great power to direct our attention. Working with negative space will help you master simplicity. Symmetry is when one side of your composition mirrors the other. It's organized and harmonious. As you explore symmetry, you'll come to appreciate architects and builders who can do their craft well. Big versus small, red versus green, happy versus sad. By using different elements that have visual contrast, whether it's size, color, or something like emotion, we can make more interesting photographs. This can be both an aesthetic and a psychological strategy. Understanding light was a challenge for me during the first part of my photography journey. I was looking for a way to apply college-level physics to photography, and it was a big mistake. It's way more simple than that. Light has 4 properties: direction, intensity, color, and quality. Understanding these 4 properties and the relationship between light and shadow will dramatically improve your photography. Light allows us to communicate mood and isolate subjects. My best advice is to remember that light is directional. This explains why a subject might be so dark even though it's so bright out. It's because the light is on the other side of the subject than our camera is. Remember, we're working in 3 dimensions, but turning it into 2. If you want to learn about light, grab a large action figure or a doll. Turn off all the lights, close the curtains, shut the doors. Grab a single light source. It can be professional lighting equipment or a lamp, but you need to be able to move it around. Keep the subject and the camera in the same position and make photos as you move the light. Compare. And if you want to learn more about lighting, study the famous painter Edward Hopper. Nested frames, also known as frames within frames, use natural or man-made elements that mimic a picture frame. The most common strategy here uses doorways and windows. Why are nested frames so effective? It's because they direct attention and add an additional layer of visual storytelling. Color theory concerns the relationship between colors and their ability to communicate different emotions. Photographers use primary colors of red, green, and blue, commonly known as RGB, and painters use red, yellow, and blue. This is because one visual medium is subtractive and one is additive. We're not going into any of those details. Different combinations of the RGB colors give us cyan, magenta, and yellow. The easiest way to use color in photography is to use less of it. Limit the number of different colors in your frame. And when you do use multiple colors, find colors that oppose each other on the color wheel. And even though painters use different primary colors, we as photographers can learn a lot from them because they have more control over color. Patterns and repetition create order, consistency, and rhythm. Photographers make this happen with shapes, lines, colors, tones, textures, or specific objects. Patterns occur naturally and are man-made. We can use patterns as a main subject, in a foreground, or in a background. When you come across an interesting pattern, explore it from all the possible angles you can. Scale and proportion both relate to size. Scale, the relationship between 2 different objects, and proportion, the relationship between different parts of a particular object. Think about the relationship between tall and short people, and then the relationship between arms and legs. As photographers, we have control over scale and proportion by choosing different lenses and by standing different distances from our subject. Objects closer to the camera appear larger in size, and wide-angle lenses distort proportion. The rule of odds is pretty simple. Look for odd groupings of subjects, objects, and forms. A form could be a group of subjects. Odd numbers prevent our brains from pairing elements of a photo. This forces us to find an entry point into the image. The decisive moment, as popularized by Henri Cartier-Bresson, is different than peak action. The decisive moment is more about all the visual elements coming into place within a frame at the right time for maximum visual harmony. Peak action is about capturing the most significant moment of a particular action. Like the peak moment when an athlete reaches for a ball or gets tossed into the air. And this is different than the decisive moment, which is more about composition. The goal is to pair peak action with the decisive moment. One of the most important aspects of photography and composition is patience. Patience to stand in a spot and wait. Patience to let a scene develop in front of you. Patience to observe the present and predict the future. Patience to get the photo no one else will. Patience ties everything together in photography, and good things come to those who wait. Stop photographing everything all at once. This section about reflexive training is a little bit different than the others, but it may be the most important because it's about the application of this information. As a photojournalist or documentary photographer, knowing everything about composition doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you've read every book about composition and watched 10,000 YouTube videos about it. It doesn't matter if you attended Missouri, Western Kentucky, or Ohio University. It doesn't matter if you know about Bresson, Robert Capa, Jill Freeman, and Mary Ellen Mark. You can't master composition until it becomes a reflexive habit. And this only happens with lots of practice. To get the hands, eyes, and brains working together, we have to train them all at the same time. It's like a lot of other knowledge in photography. If you can't apply it in real time, it's useless. This is the real challenge. Pay more attention to your backgrounds and the contrast between subjects and layers. Where does a figure fall in relation to the background? Is there contrast and separation? Keep moving. One of the best ways to get good at managing backgrounds is to just experience more of them. In addition to changing your perspective on the horizontal plane, get high and get low. Don't make all your photos at eye level. If you're photographing a crowd from ground level, get high to communicate scale. This might mean reaching over your head with your camera, climbing some stairs, or a parking garage. A drone takes things to the next level. Fill the frame by getting closer. This minimizes distractions, harnesses layers, and depth of field. Robert Capa, founding member of Magnum Photos, is famously quoted, "If your photos aren't good enough, you're not close enough." There's not much that makes me cringe more when looking at photography than crooked horizons. Feel free to use Dutch angles all you want, but when you aren't doing that with purpose and intention, level your horizons. You have the opportunity to level your horizons both in camera and in post-production. This is a low-effort habit to build and will encourage good composition in camera. If you'd like to learn more about photography and photojournalism, I've linked a playlist and opportunities for online lessons and in-person workshops at my website.